I was brought up in a vaguely Christian environment and with assumptions which I now realise are derived from Christian ideas, moral assumptions. But I didn't go to church really at all, except I suppose occasionally to like carol services at school. I went to a technically C of E school, but I wasn't really exposed to church at all. I didn't read the Bible. I didn't really have any Christian friends that I can think of, maybe one or two Christian friends, but I wasn't really exposed to Christianity in a direct way. And I was an annoying teenage atheist. It was the peak time for that when I was a teenager. I read The God Delusion aged, I don't know, 13 or something, and thought it was absolutely fantastic because I was 13. So yeah, the idea that the Bible might have anything meaningful to reveal about sexual politics was a new one to me. And I did kind of end up, through the process of writing the book largely and just thinking more deeply about these questions, reaching Christian conclusions almost against my will. I think that was the journey, roughly. And almost more through data analysis than through anything else.
So far from it being silly to go back to a Bronze Age document because it's unsuitable for life in the 21st century, perhaps we have this document called the Bible because it has proved successful in ordering our lives towards greater flourishing and blessing, and therefore it's the ancient voices that we probably need to pay attention to, that have some wisdom. You've said that you think Christianity is kind of sociologically true in that it can produce these sorts of societies that reproduce themselves. And I guess the next question is, could it also be supernaturally true? Is it not just a bottom-up phenomenon, but might it actually be that this works because it's true, rather than because it works, we'll call it true, if you see what I mean? And if so, what kind of thoughts have you had along that trajectory, testing whether this stuff is supernaturally true and not just sociologically?
Well, if it were supernaturally true, you would expect it to be sociologically true. So that's one piece of evidence. You can make a strong secular argument for taking the Bible very seriously, as Jordan Peterson has argued, for instance, that in a sense, these stories, particularly the most ancient ones in the Old Testament, have basically survived a very long period of natural selection, that they've been preserved and passed down for such a long time because they're true in a metaphorical way, at least. So they say something very important and useful to human beings, that the Bible understands human beings extremely well. And if it hadn't, it wouldn't have been preserved. And that's true of the Gospels as well. You can argue, you can therefore say that one ought to read the Bible without having to believe in any of the supernatural stuff. And you can say, as a lot of other cultural Christians have, civilizational Christians, whatever you want to call them, people like Tom Holland, friend of the pod, Ian Hesioli, even Richard Dawkins nowadays is saying this, that Christianity produces good outcomes in terms of building beautiful civilizations, and not just in terms of art, but in terms of and architecture, but sort of highly functional civilizations, and that de-Christianization does the opposite and makes people miserable. And I think that's all true. But then, of course, the next step is there anything upstairs? Does that suggest that it's supernaturally true as well? And I hope it is. I'm not sure if I can really say anything more than that. I go to church. I kind of think of myself as an agnostic Christian. I go to church. Some weeks I believe and some weeks I don't. But one of the things that my husband and I have committed to do, he's in the same boat as me, is we are so convinced that it's sociologically true, and we would so like it to be supernaturally true, that we want to give our children the best chance possible of believing both truths. And the way to do that, I think, is to expose them to Christians. So not just take them to church, but we want to send them to Christian schools. And I read Rowan Williams actually saying just this in an interview. He was interviewed in The Spectator recently, and he said that the best way to believe is to be around people who are really good at believing, to just expose yourself to faithful people and spend time with them. And they also, by the way, of all the people that I know in the world, the Christians tend to be some of the best people, just in terms of being kind and generous and thoughtful. It's not a hardship to hang out with Christians, in my experience. I'm sure there are, of course, exceptions to that.
There are some. I can tell you, Louise.
I worry sometimes that it's not. There are, of course, adult conversions every day of the week, but I worry sometimes that it's not possible for me to supernaturally believe deep down, because I didn't as a child. But for me, that's all the more reason to give my children the chance to deep down believe, from exposing them to this as children. So that's my reasoning. And then maybe what will happen, I do think that the secular experience that we've had in our lifetimes is very, very likely to be a blip, not least because one of the best predictors of whether you have children nowadays during the period of no birth rates is how religious you are. And the more religious you are, the more children you have. And that means that not only are the genes that produce greater religiosity, because it does seem to be a genetic basis to one's openness to the transcendental, those genes are being selected for, but also that religion is also something that you learn at home, and if you don't lose it in adulthood, which most people actually don't, you pass on to your own children. So by both mechanisms, religiosity is being selected for, which does suggest that in the future everyone's going to be more religious, and it could be that this period of secularism is looked on as a historical curiosity. And so maybe what we can, even though me and my husband and many other people raised in our kind of cultural milieu, even if we are doubtful Christians, more doubtful than most, maybe we can break that chain. That's the plan.
See, I've got a friend. Yeah, it's a good plan. It's a good plan, but don't count yourself out of the possibility for faith. I've got a friend from university, and I remember she once wrote me a letter. You can tell I'm old because it was an epistolary relationship, and there she is writing me a letter back in the 1900s, and she says in that letter, I hope you realize, Glenn, I could never be a person of faith. And I remember just reading that and thinking, she thinks I've got the faith gene and she doesn't. And sometimes she looks at me and she thinks she dodged a bullet. And sometimes she looks at me and she thinks I've hit the jackpot. But what's been interesting is like pressing in with her to the things that she already believes, like things like human rights. And you sort of... And what's an interesting conversation with her is saying, okay, you now see, don't you, that the whole human rights discourse and the whole inviolable worth and dignity of all human beings is a particularly Christian idea. You thought it was secular. You thought it was just obvious and natural and universal. It's actually a Christian thing, and you really already believe in it, don't you? And you sort of say to her, like, okay, I'm giving you two options. You can believe in human rights, or you can believe this is a godless universe, but, not both. And which are you going to lean into? And she picks the human rights things every day of the week. Most of my friends do. They actually find them. They actually do believe in all sorts of stuff that doesn't make any sense if we are in the godless universe, Because and to put that in terms of the sexual disenchantment conversation, the Bloodhound Gang. I really am old. This is from 1999. They're saying, you and me, baby, we ain't nothing but mammals. So let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel, which actually has the form of a philosophical argument. It's like premise one: if we are nothing but mammals, then conclusion, then sex means absolutely nothing. But then you run the argument the other way. No, but sex really is sacred in that most profound sense. Therefore, you and me, baby, we ain't nothing but mammals, actually. And I just, because I always have an allergic reaction when somebody talks about the double-decker universe and, is there something upstairs? We can all deal downstairs most of the time, but every now and again, the religious have to go upstairs and do their religious bit. Whereas actually, I think the Christian vision is we're all living downstairs. It's just that downstairs is alive with transcendent value in everything from human rights to sex. And that I guess the process of going to church is putting yourself in the path of rituals and words and songs and prayers that awaken you to the beliefs you already have. And yeah, I guess my hope for you would be, it would be a coming to see that you already live in an enchanted downstairs bit, and that you can find it a natural thing to believe in the supernatural. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I do think that some people are more receptive to it than others, but I agree that you can make yourself more receptive through good practice. Rod Dreher, I had him on my podcast recently. He's someone who's just so alive to the supernatural all the time. And we spoke about angels and demons and Satan. He is like fully the magic and the mystery of medieval Christianity lives on in his universe. And it doesn't. He could be right. I don't know. I've never seen an angel. That doesn't mean that they're not real.
Me neither.
I've chosen to let go of my skepticism about that sort of thing, not least because every other culture believes in it.
Yeah.
It's in some fashion except ours. And so who is to say that and when I say our culture, I mean our culture for the last 5 minutes. Who is to say that we're right?
Yeah. Which is why I love the way Ayaan Hirsi Ali and her husband Neil Ferguson, they got baptized last year, and they describe themselves both as lapsed atheists, which I think that's a really interesting way of unlearning the atheism bit rather than bolting on this weird supernatural bit. Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah.
The full interview is coming out on the Speak Live channel very soon. But in the meantime, why don't you sign up to the Rebirth Conference? Me and Justin Briley are putting on a one-day conference in central London, the 22nd of November. We are noticing this uptick in interest in faith, in going back to church. We want to discover what's going on, why it's happening, and how the church can respond with bold, faithful creativity. Join us on the 22nd of November in central London. Go to rebirthconference.net to find out more. And while you're here, make sure you hit like on this video, share it around the place, and subscribe so that you won't miss the full interview with Louise Perry. See you then.